On this Monday night, ditching the classroom at the last minute for online learning. The nervous parents changing their minds and choosing to keep kids at home. And those who don't have any options.
I'm just hoping for the best.
BC submerged in a sea of smoke.
It's off the chart in terms of how much we should be breathing in.
The alarming risk to people with chronic illnesses and the grim predictions for the future. A popular Canadian co-op sold to Americans.
It's not what I want.
What's in store for MEC and its devoted members? Plus, rain and open water instead of snow and ice. A chilling report on the Arctic's new normal.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin with the topic we're all tired of but can't turn away from. COVID-19 case numbers keep rising in some regions. Most of the positive cases right now are in people under the age of 40, but that can easily change as it spreads through the community. Ontario's premier has pleaded repeatedly for people to stop going to big parties. Today, Quebec's premier said, even if you're not worried about getting sick yourself, consider others who you could unknowingly infect.
Think about our vulnerable people. Think about our children. Think about the consequences of letting your guard down. So I'm asking people to avoid gatherings as much as possible. Try to avoid contacts as much as possible. So we have to react together now.
Over the past 7 days, an average of 838 daily new cases have been reported across the country. We haven't seen those kinds of daily numbers since the end of May. The bulk of the newly reported infections are in Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, and BC. There were 124 new cases in Alberta, 292 in Quebec today, 251 in Ontario, and 97 in BC. It is the fifth straight day of more than 200 new cases in Ontario. Most are in Toronto, Ottawa, and the Peel region. Premier Doug Ford says if that continues, new targeted restrictions could be put in place. The demand for COVID-19 tests is surging as more Canadians head back to work and school. This was the scene this morning at one of Ottawa's main testing centres. The lines there have been so long, people sometimes have to wait for hours, and porta potties are now being added. It all adds up to an uncertain time, and that uncertainty is playing out in schools across this country. Students, parents, and teachers trying to get back on track, knowing things can easily be derailed if positive cases emerge. Students in the Toronto School District began their return to class today. As Jeff Semple reports, not everything went as planned.
Come on, Miss Amelia.
Canada's largest school board welcomed Toronto students back to their new reality.
Who's next?
Greeted with pylons, plexiglass, and face masks.
Can't see anybody's faces, and then, yeah, it's gonna be a different experience.
And for some students, back to school has already backfired.
It is bound to happen.
One class at this Toronto area school was sent home to self-isolate after one of their classmates tested positive. In Alberta, which opened schools a couple of weeks ago, hundreds of students have been forced to quarantine.
With the climbing COVID-19 caseload, thousands of parents across the greater Toronto area are now changing their minds at the last moment and signing their kids up instead for remote virtual learning.
Among those opting for online learning, this Toronto father of two.
Kids are kids, right? If in the school environment, I know there are social distance rule, there will be wear masks. It will be tough, I would say, for the kids.
His kids were supposed to start remote learning this week, but that's now been delayed as the Toronto School Board scrambles to accommodate a last-minute rush, with 64,000 students choosing to learn online.
As a result of the thousands that are keeping their kids away from school, the result is that classes are being collapsed, class sizes are going up.
Others have no choice but to send their kids to school. Andrea Wobik is a single mother and a lawyer.
You know, I expect that there are going to be stops and starts, and that's very unfortunate. But, you know, I'm just hoping for the best, and we'll have to deal with whatever comes.
There probably will be outbreaks on and off in the schools, but I think after a while things probably will settle down.
And so far, at least, the vast majority of COVID-19 cases in schools have spread from the community, not in the classroom. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Another major story, we are tracking the wildfires on the U.S. West Coast. Dozens of major fires are still burning and the devastation is spreading. Now a group of Canadians is headed south to help. The Alberta government says 45 firefighters are traveling to Oregon this week to assist crews on the ground there. This is what awaits them all along the West Coast, from Washington State to Oregon and down the coast of California. It is a battle to try to slow down fast-moving fires and limit the damage. In parts of Oregon, it's too late. At least 10 people are dead. More than 20 others are missing after entire communities were incinerated.
It's the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I had seen videos, but it's 1,000 times worse than I could have ever imagined.
Across the 3 states, at least 27 people are now confirmed dead. Thousands of homes are destroyed, and the smoke gives you a sense of the scale of this. It's visible right across the continent now. The smoke has drifted all the way to the East Coast, with hazy skies reported in Toronto and New York City. But the worst effect in terms of air quality is on the West Coast. In places like Vancouver, pollution levels from the fine particulate matter in this smoke are so high, people are being told to avoid strenuous exercise outside. Robin Gill explains what makes forest fire smoke potentially dangerous.
Smoke has shrouded British Columbia, blocking out Vancouver's view and creating concern for people who have chronic illnesses.
We're most concerned with the immediate effects for people that have pre-existing heart and lung disease or people with type 2 diabetes. We do know that events like this can lead to increased deaths.
It's prolonged exposure that will produce the most deadly consequences.
The fine particulate is so small, not only is it making it into your lungs, but it's also going and reaching into your bloodstream, and that's where damage to organs.
In BC, there are 31 monitoring stations that determine the air quality index. A tube collects the fine particulate known as PM2.
The particles are coming into the instrument. They're being measured on a tape that gets darkened as it collects the fine particulate matter, and during this time right now, we're seeing the tape get these dark spots in ways that we haven't seen them before.
On a perfectly clear day, an ideal measurement is 5 to 15 micrograms per cubic meter of air. The goal is to keep an average day at 25. But in the last few days, BC has experienced 150 to 170 on average.
It's off the chart in terms of how much we should be breathing in.
Vancouver has opened up clean air centers to give people a chance to breathe and get away from the haze. And there are dire warnings that there will be a greater need for these spaces in the future.
This is it. This is reality. So we're just going to have to learn to live with this, and probably it's going to get worse.
Scenes like this are grim when Vancouverites are trying to enjoy the last days of summer. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
A big win for Canada today in a tense trade dispute with the United States. Just before Canada was set to announce how it would retaliate for American tariffs on Canadian aluminum, the U.S. blinked and backed down. Abigail Bimman joins me from Ottawa. Abigail, what happened and what's the reaction?
Donna, Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland describes this as a good day for Canada, a day where common sense prevailed. And she and the International Trade Minister stressed over and over this was a unilateral move by the United States.
Canada will not be imposing reciprocal countermeasures on the United States. Let me be clear. Canada has not conceded anything.
The government is clear they are ready to impose dollar-for-dollar counter tariffs if the U.S. strikes again. And the Americans haven't taken the trade threat off the table. The statement from the U.S. Trade Representative details that if Canada exceeds a certain quota of aluminum per month before the end of the year, the Americans will impose that 10% tariff retroactively on that month and may reimpose it fully going forward. A Canadian source calls that bluster.
We have not agreed to anything. We have not negotiated an agreement with the U.S. on quotas, as your question suggested. What has happened today is that the United States has chosen to unilaterally lift its tariffs on Canadian aluminum exports to the United States.
The Deputy Prime Minister wouldn't answer whether Canada is likely to exceed the quotas set by the U.S., just stressed the American move was a unilateral one and Canada hasn't negotiated a deal on aluminum. Donna?
All right, Abigail Bimman in Ottawa, thank you. Blaine Higgs is settling in for a second term as Premier of New Brunswick. The Progressive Conservative took a risk and called an election during the pandemic, and it worked in his favor. He not only won a majority, the campaign and voting day went smoothly, proving it can be done. Though as Ross Lord reports, the results reveal a divide in the province.
As Canada's only officially bilingual province, New Brunswick takes pride in harmony between cultures. But the election outcome highlights divisions. Francophone ridings along northern New Brunswick went entirely Liberal red. Other parts of the province, mostly Anglophone ridings, have been painted PC blue.
The French seem to be Liberals and the English seem to be more Conservative side, so that leaves a bit of, uncertainty, I guess.
The good news? The unprecedented campaign went off with no major disruptions. As they claim success, New Brunswick election planners also have a word of advice for other parts of Canada. Be ready for surprises.
I think the mail-in ballots really is the largest one. Prepare for a significant increase in that.
Premier Blaine Higgs rode a wave of popularity for New Brunswick's stifling of COVID-19 all the way to a majority.
I'm looking for stability in all parts of the province. I'm looking for changing the process that we haven't seen work because people have left the northern part of the province, particularly at high unemployment rates.
His main rival, Liberal leader Kevin Vickers, failed to convert his Parliament Hill hero status into success at the polls. In fact, Vickers lost in his own riding.
I will be resigning as leader of the Liberal Party of New Brunswick.
Some wonder if Higgs will use his new authority to reimpose a shake-up to health care that he backed off from when he had a minority.
They didn't say, oh, this was a terrible idea, we will never do it again. So I am not reassured now that they're in a majority.
Higgs insists he'll consult others to seek consensus on issues before he takes action. Ross Lord, Global News, Fredericton, New Brunswick.
A positive development today in the case of Alexei Navalny, the Russian opposition leader who was poisoned. He has regained consciousness. Navalny posted this from his hospital room saying, "I have been missing you. I still can't do much, but yesterday I managed to breathe on my own for the entire day." Navalny was flown to Berlin after falling ill on a domestic flight in Russia on August 20th. 3 labs have independently verified he was poisoned by a form of the nerve agent Novichok. His family believes the Kremlin ordered the poisoning. The Kremlin denies that. Navalny says he intends to return to Russia when he recovers. Big changes coming next. Who's taking over this outdoor retailer and Canadian co-op? Opposition is growing to a deal that will privatize a popular Canadian retailer. Mountain Equipment Co-op announced it's being taken over by an American investment firm. A petition calling for the deal to be cancelled already has over 10,000 signatures. MEC, as it's known, was born nearly 50 years ago as a grassroots cooperative in Vancouver. Customers bought $5 memberships to become part of the co-op, essentially owners of the company. And as Mike Drolet reports, seeing where it's headed hurts.
For almost 50 years, MEC customers have shared a bond in ownership and pride in a socially conscious company that was uniquely Canadian. So news of a takeover by American investment firm Kingswood Capital came as a shock.
It's not going to be the same as it has been. Like, it's a company that I love and trust.
MEC had to close all 22 of its stores and lay off 1,300 employees because of the pandemic, but its true financial troubles can be traced back a few years to when it began aggressively expanding into more big box stores at a time when consumers were moving to more online shopping. MEC grew its outdoor specialist business by selling $5 memberships to like-minded customers, but in 2013 it removed the co-op from its logo and expanded its product lines, going more mainstream in the process.
That's what the market wants, isn't it? It's not what I want.
Ultimately, MEC's sales couldn't match its growth.
The board of directors thought that for them there was no other way or no other option that were viable in order to keep the company afloat so that the company could survive, because otherwise they would have to go bankrupt.
So MEC will continue to exist, although the new owners are expected to close 5 stores and cut 25% of its workforce. And those 5 million memberships, they'll soon be worthless.
The new owners have said they're going to keep the name, they're going to keep some of the same brands. So I think it's going to be very similar. It's just not going to be members helping members. And if that was important to you, you're going to notice that difference.
As a customer, not a member.
Mike Gurley, Global News, Toronto.
Climate change still ahead, the latest signs of how the Arctic has been altered.
You're watching Global National.
The signs are everywhere. We know the Arctic is changing, and now a new report from America's National Center for Atmospheric Research says the effect of global warming is so severe the region is actually shifting to a different climate. Open water and rain are becoming more typical of the region than ice and snow. Eric Sorensen explains the findings and what they mean for the future.
The Arctic, a massive part of Canada's geography with a consequential impact on our climate, is changing rapidly. So quickly, a new study suggests the Arctic may already be transitioning to a new climate, not perpetual ice, but more water, and snow giving way to more rain. It means the past may no longer be a predictor, because the climate may now be that different from the past.
The Arctic has warmed so significantly that its year-to-year variability is moving outside the bounds of past fluctuations, signaling that it's transitioning to a new climate.
Since the 1970s, satellites have been able to show us the Arctic ice cap melting somewhat every summer and then the ice cover increasing each winter. But over the last 40 years, NASA says the summer minimum, the red line, shows the sea ice gradually shrinking. Overall, Arctic sea ice has declined 12% per decade, and the smallest 13 summers of ice have all occurred in the last 13 years.
Greenpeace has been navigating the Arctic for decades, and they've seen the changes.
I'll say like the permanent ice edge that exists, it's getting smaller and smaller every year.
These are the waters off Baffin Island. 99% of Canadians do not live in the Arctic, so we're not seeing firsthand the open waters, the melting sea ice, and the loss of polar bear habitat.
The new research is yet another important piece of evidence showing that it's really time we stop hitting the snooze button and wake up to the climate emergency.
The signs are all there. Last month, a huge 113 square kilometer piece of Greenland's ancient ice sheet broke off, clearing the way for more ice loss into the sea. Greenpeace wants to create ocean sanctuaries, areas protected from oil drilling and pollution. And they want political leaders in this country and elsewhere to act now.
We want to make sure that world leaders understand the urgency of the climate crisis and they understand the role of healthy oceans in tackling the climate crisis.
There's no longer much debate that the Arctic climate is changing. The new research suggests what may be more difficult is forecasting just how quickly. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
The state of the planet's ecosystems and biodiversity is also in peril. A new report from the United Nations says not a single target has been met in the 10 years since nearly 200 nations agreed to take steps to prevent the mass loss of wildlife and natural habitats. Those steps included slowing deforestation, limiting overfishing, and preserving wetlands and marine areas. There has been some progress, but the report says biodiversity will continue to decline on the current trajectory. Concerns were also raised about hundreds of billions in government subsidies for fossil fuel and other industries that harm the environment. Next, the potential crisis at the polls as U.S. election workers face the pandemic. In 50 days, we'll know whether President Trump will spend another 4 years in the White House. And the build-up to the presidential election is fraught with anxiety. Not only is the country deeply divided politically, there's unrest because of police brutality and racism, and then there's the pandemic. Tens of thousands of people have dropped out of plans to work at polling stations because they fear being infected. As Jackson Proskow reports, it's calling into question whether the election will be free and fair.
When she returns it, what do you think she does from there?
It's training day in the Baltimore suburbs.
There's ballots in here?
Where poll workers, known as election judges, are learning how to hold a vote in the middle of a pandemic.
The biggest challenge has been educating everybody about all the changes.
In here, officials in Maryland were already bracing for unprecedented interest in this election. Then came COVID-19.
We need about 40,000 election judges to hold the election. We saw about 15,000 of them drop out all at once. So in our world, that constitutes an unprecedented emergency.
The majority of poll workers are over 60, the group at highest risk for severe illness from the virus.
I'm going to be 80 in November,
And it just seemed to me a little bit doubtful whether I should be out sitting in a room.
Eleanor Green is one of those volunteers who reluctantly decided it was better to sit this one out.
Even if you're just giving out I voted stickers, you're still in reasonably close contact with people. Trying to do all of this 6 feet apart seems a little difficult.
Without election judges, most polling locations can't open, so states have had to get creative. In Maryland, instead of the usual 3,400 polling sites, there will be just 260 super polls. At places like the 80,000-seat FedEx Field, home to Washington's NFL team. Election officials are also encouraging people to vote by mail.
It'll end up being a rigged election, or they will never come out with an outcome.
With the president baselessly undermining the process, there's another challenge, convincing people their votes will still be counted fairly.
There haven't been many instances where people have successfully used vote by mail to commit voter fraud.
In just this one county, half of eligible voters are expected to vote by mail. The rest will experience an election unlike any other in American history. One where the virus is an issue, both on the ballot and at the ballot box. Jackson Proskow, Global News, Glen Burnie, Maryland.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching. We leave you tonight with a tribute to Hélène Chrétien, the wife of former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. A private funeral was held today in the couple's hometown of Shawinigan, Quebec. Hélène Chrétien died peacefully on Saturday morning, just days after the couple celebrated their 63rd wedding anniversary.